When it came time to sit down and film this retrospective, one of the key messages that we wanted to convey was just how different GI Joe Resolute felt.
Resolute just blew my socks off.
Resolute it's good. It's really good.
Warren Ellis is a terrific writer.
They were willing to kill off some characters.
It was like bringing a comic book to life.
And I think the biggest change of a character is Cobra Commander.
I really like the viciousness of Cobra Commander.
Whenever they showed the flag, I was like, holy cow, this is the flag.
The fight between Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, that was vintage anime to me.
It gave the whole movie an entirely different feel.
Yeah, I was on the edge of my seat through the entire thing.
It is the definitive GI Joe movie.
And we can take a closer look as we discuss GI Joe Resolute right here and now. Let's begin.
I grew up listening to my great uncle talk about World War II. He was in the Army Air Corps, served in the Pacific. He was my hero. And G.I. Joe was kind of like seeing him in action for me.
And to breathe life into what would become the highly successful G.I. Joe, a real American hero franchise, toy company Hasbro would bring them onto store shelves in 1982 with an associated comic book run by Marvel, which would begin in that same year.
I was prime age. As soon as they hit the pegs, interest in all other toy lines pretty much died at that point. For birthdays and Christmas gifts, it was all Joe for years after that.
You know, growing up with the G.I. Joe, I was kind of late, I guess you could say. I remember that Undertow was the first carded figure that I actually picked out, bought, loved it. And then at some point in time, I do remember I did get one of the earlier Joes. I got the Sergeant Slaughter, but I had to trade with another kid to get it.
I was born in 75, so in 82, I was 7. We went to Hex one day, is it like a Walmart, I guess you'd say, and we went in and went into the toy aisle, and I seen this thing, and it said G.I. Joe. I knew my track record with Star Wars figures with the weapons. As soon as I get a weapon, it'll be gone. So I picked the first guy I seen that didn't have a weapon, which was Breaker. And then we went back a few days later, and I got Snake Eyes.
It was a daily after-school activity. We would run outside and dig in the dirt and play Joes. We would obviously watch the cartoon all the time.
The cartoon would debut in 1983, produced by Sunbow Productions. It was meant to be kid-friendly and teach good moral lessons, but ultimately it was meant to help sell the toy line.
We moved to where we had cable TV. I got home from school one day, and we put it on channel 11, and G.I. Joe starts coming on. I'm like, what is this? They have a cartoon? This is so awesome. I'd get off the school bus, and I'd just be like pushing down the door, trying to get to the living room, sit and watch this show.
For the Sunbow cartoon, I really enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, it was an introduction for a lot of kids into G.I. Joe. I mean, it's a little corny now, but I'll still watch it.
I guess you sum it up as just an adventure show, right? Like an adventure show with like a corny Cobra plot to overthrow the world, and G.I. Joe just going on an adventure to stop them. And you would enjoy the cartoon, love it obviously, because you take it as you would watch this, and then as you're watching it, you would think, I'm gonna do this with my Joes, and just talk about it, with your friends and all that stuff.
I've always liked it. I've always enjoyed it. It was one of the really good military cartoons.
This TV series would last until 1986, eventually concluding its story in this era with an animated movie in 1987. The movie introduced some new characters and expanded the fantastical elements of the story with the introduction of a higher villainous society known as Cobra Law.
I think I was able to catch the movie when it first came out.
There is a lot of good parts to it, a lot of parts I didn't care for.
And it came out, and I was all excited. And then it started with Serpentor. And I wasn't a big Serpentor fan. So whenever they started doing the Cobra Law, I was like, okay, where's this going to go?
As a kid, I loved it. As an adult, I still like it a lot. I do question the Cobra Law angle, but I don't hate it. When I saw it, I knew who Don Johnson was because I was a fan Miami Vice.
And then they got done with it, and I was like, okay, it was interesting, but it's weird because that was a little bit too far gone for me.
Ultimately, the 1987 film did develop a little bit of a polarizing reputation, albeit still has a strong cult following. This trend does continue into the 21st century with GI Joe's live-action films, which often get a mixed to negative reaction from fans and critics alike. But the standout amongst hardcore fans would be when GI Joe would go back to their animation roots. Specifically, 2009's GI Joe Resolute would be released as a series of shorter web episodes, but would then be combined and re-aired as a continuous 1 hour long movie.
My overall impressions of Resolute is that it is the definitive GI Joe movie.
I watched it through, and I was like, this is amazing. Whenever they showed the flag, I was like, holy cow, this is the flag.
A lot of the characters look really good. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And Storm Shadow looked more like a traditional ninja. Snake Eyes had that like really cool commando look.
For me, I was on the edge of my seat through the entire thing. I was like, holy cow, what's going to happen?
You're taking like the Sunbow series and you're throwing a lot of like realism into it.
It was darker, it was grittier, it certainly took the best parts of the comics and the cartoon and meshed it into one thing. What I mean by that is that Resolute would bring back a lot of the elements we were already familiar with, but would age up the storytelling with more mature themes and overtones, thus appealing to those who grew up with GI Joe and were ready to see more modern, fleshed out versions of the characters they already knew. While they didn't use a large voice cast, they did manage to employ famed voice actor Charlie Adler, known for roles in shows such as Tiny Toon Adventures as well as Brave Star. And quite notably, renowned author Warren Ellis would receive writing duties and credits for this very special edition of GI Joe.
Warren Ellis is a terrific writer. I've got a lot of his issues of Hellblazer he did.
I remember watching Iron Man 3. I think he had some credits on writing that. And what was it, Red? He came up with the characters for the Red movies, and I think those were originally a graphic novel, if I'm not mistaken.
Ellis certainly wasn't afraid to take some chances with his version of GI Joe, and spoiler alert, right from the opening scenes, he'd hit us with some pretty big shock value.
They were willing to kill off some characters, and some of them were some pretty big characters.
At the beginning, you see one of my favorite characters, and you only see him for like 2 seconds and he's already dead, which is Major Blood.
There's no question about who killed him, right? You see that dagger with the Cobra head on it. Cobra Commander must have did that.
Cutting the traitor Major Blood's heart in half right in front of you.
The death of Bazooka, that hit, and it hit pretty hard.
Poor Bazooka. Why did it have to be him? In the cartoon, flashing back to Sunbow, they never showed any of that. Nobody ever got killed.
The way they found him with Storm Shadow's note in his mouth.
And then it was a letter to Snake Eyes.
Storm Shadow killed Bazooka, and now he's calling you out.
The big fight with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. The part that really got my attention is where they're dropping Snake Eyes out of the plane, and he opens up that wingsuit, and he glides in onto that dock, and he just starts wreaking havoc on that island. And Storm Shadow knows he's there whenever the explosions start happening, and he's taking people out.
The fight between Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, that was just vintage anime to me.
This rivalry is a callback to Larry Hama's epic 155-issue Marvel comic run, and for the purpose of GI Joe Resolute, the opposition between the two ninjas stems back to their master from the Arashikage ninja clan. Their master had known the sacred martial arts steps of his clan, known as the 7 Steps to the Sun. But he had refused to teach the last of these steps to Storm Shadow, knowing that the young ninja would be reckless and use it to cause death.
Because, the Hard Master did not truly trust Storm Shadow, and he had a right to.
You haven't taught me the 7th step yet. The seventh step is death.
When Storm Shadow hires Cobra to eliminate his master if he doesn't show him the seventh form.
Will you teach me the seventh step? No.
Obviously he refuses, so he kills him, and he also wounds Snake Eyes, which I can't talk, right?
Snake Eyes gets shot in the throat whenever Zartan's trying to shoot the Hard Master, and Snake Eyes is trying to help him.
Much to Storm Shadow's surprise during his duel with Snake Eyes, it turns out that their master, prior to his death, had actually passed on the knowledge and form of the seventh step to Snake Eyes.
And then we find out later that he was taught the seventh form over Storm Shadow, and that's how, spoilers, how he beats Storm Shadow.
They kill Storm Shadow. Spoiler alert! Snake Eyes kills Storm Shadow. And then they bury him, and Snake Eyes ties the sash around the sword, and he walks off. And you see the sash blowing in the wind. And I'm thinking, is he really dead? Or did he just pull an Arishikage trick on Snake Eyes?
And then obviously at the end you find out that he's not dead, right? Because his grave is empty.
Additionally, while Larry Hama's comic run always depicted Snake Eyes and Scarlet as a romantic couple, the Sunbow cartoon always opted to pair up Scarlet with Duke instead. Resolute takes this a step further by at least hinting at a love triangle in some ways, albeit Scarlet ultimately ends up with Duke.
When you see Duke, you know, his little spat with Scarlet, you can either go with him or stay with me.
You can go with him or stay with me.
Then I stay.
And I was like, no, it's supposed to be Snake Eyes and Scarlet, not Duke and Scarlet.
And she decides to stay, which I think is great. I always thought that Duke and Scarlet as a pairing is over Snake Eyes, because Snake Eyes is more obsessed with his ninja ways and his, you know, stuff like that.
One of the things I liked about Resolute is I really feel like they took the characters in different directions.
It gave the whole movie or web series an entirely different feel.
And I think the biggest change of a character is Cobra Commander.
Always thought Cobra Commander needed to be a little bit more vicious. He needed to be more bloodthirsty.
I need my Cobra Commander to be vicious. I need him to be someone to be scared of. And Resolute accomplishes that.
And he explains it, that speech where he's like, I played the fool, now it's time, you know, not to be the fool anymore and be serious.
It suited me once to appear weak and cowardly.
And there's that one scene where he finds out that GI Joe's coming to Springfield. There's that one guy who tells him that he can't get the power levels up to the harp device in time. It's going to take a few hours. And the Cobra Commander is like, what? He just slices his throat with his sword without even like hesitation.
When he blew up Moscow, that was crazy.
Moscow got blowed up. I was like, oh snap, somebody's going to have a bad day.
In this occasion, like Cobra Commander literally demonstrated it by actually destroying something, not by like moving the Eiffel Tower or making it disappear, you know what I mean?
The main storyline revolves around Cobra Commander obtaining a high-frequency active aurora research program, or HARP, an installation which can superheat the ionosphere and effectively block worldwide satellite communication. They then use a particle cannon located in Siberia to fire particles into the ionosphere, where they're dispersed, and then the particles are collected over an intended target to fire downwards and destroy said target, which has a similar destructive impact as a nuclear explosion. As already mentioned, the target here is Moscow.
And boom, death from above. Like a laser beam?
Furthermore, while knocking out worldwide satellite communication, Cobra maintains its own network of communication using stratolytes that are significantly above ground level but below the ionosphere, thus keeping their own covert communication intact. To combat all of this, the Joes break up into different teams, with Roadblock and Gung Ho heading up an operation to recover the HARP installation. Scarlet goes with Duke to disarm the particle cannon, and Tunnel Rat leads an expedition to knock out Cobra's Stratolite network. The Joes eventually track Cobra Commander to Springfield and turn his own particle cannon against him, even though he tries to hide himself in a shielded unit of sorts at the end.
They're in Springfield in the control room when Cobra Commander's locked behind his bulletproof, bomb-proof door.
You know, like at the end, Cobra Commander's pod is missing. It's not there. Duke says a little bit about it, but like Cobra Commander's still alive.
Just the way they did the characters, the way they updated Destro, he looked great. Baroness looked great.
There's that one scene where Destro blows up that hallway and Gung Ho and Roadblock ran right into it. You see the explosion and it cuts to like another scene.
I think there was one point where Gung Ho tosses Roadblock his grenade launcher or something like that, and Roadblock makes a hole with it. And I'm like, yes, this is how a team works.
The action was certainly fast-paced, and the stakes felt high when it was Tunnel Rat's turn to shine, what with his mission to disable Cobra's aforementioned high-altitude Stratolite communications network.
They tapped Tunnel Rat to go up and disarm him. I was like, oh, is he going to be able to make it? When he's on the last one and all the Joes were having to, like, parachute out, I'm like, how's Tunnel Rat going to get out of this? This isn't looking good for Tunnel Rat. Is Tunnel Rat going to be the next Joe that gets the axe here? And he snips the wire, does something, does what he needs to do, and he jumps off. And I'm like, holy cats, this is amazing. And I was just on the edge of my seat, and I was like, man, get it done.
And then Zartan, I really liked, how he was portrayed, even though he had just a little bit of time on there.
The fighting between Zartan and Scarlet and Duke, that was amazing.
I do like the designs of the characters in that they, Duke, Flint, Beachhead, in particular, Beachhead looked really cool.
I liked Stalker's character design. I liked Roadblock's character design.
One notable design and overall character change was making the swap of dial tone to a young female character, leaving fans to speculate what happened, if anything, to the original dial tone character of 1986.
That at some point the actual dial tone may have retired from Joe's and they just continue his code name, which, it sounds kind of cool.
With GI Joe Resolute not getting the same level of exposure as the franchise's live-action films, it does beg the question and spark the conversation whether or not it's considered as being underrated.
Resolute is so underrated.
Maybe it just came out at the wrong time.
I don't think it gets enough credit for what it did.
I don't think it's underrated at all. It's probably the better of anything that came out in the 2000s, including the movies. Everybody that I've ever talked to, a lot of people bring up Resolute.
Perhaps it's fair to conclude that while Resolute wasn't given the same treatment of a highly publicized blockbuster film, those who did see it praise it for what it offered to the GI Joe franchise.
I love the anime feel of it. I thought it was crisp.
I love anime, since Ninja Scroll and Akira.
And they did make a set of figures for Resolute. It had Flint and Duke and Snake Eyes and Scarlet. I can't remember who else. And there's a Cobra Commander from Resolute.
If I would have seen it back then, I definitely would have got into collecting figures sooner. I have a bunch of them, but I've had to go back and buy them.
Now, as a quick side note, I just want to ask if you can please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, click the notification bell, and press that like button. It's a small effort for you, but it'll go a long way towards helping me with growing the channel. Whether you're hearing about GI Joe Resolute for the first time, or if it's already part of your ongoing rewatch schedule, it's safe to say that it's considered as a must-see edition of GI Joe lore. While intended to be a standalone experience, it does its job in terms of providing an entertainment installment of timeless GI Joe content while still leaving fans wanting more. In the modern resurgence of GI Joe, its name is certainly pushed to the forefront of recommended titles.
In my book, it was a huge impact. It was like a page turning.
Had some grittiness to it.
And it was like bringing a comic book to life.
They weren't afraid to kill off, characters.
It felt like watching it like they were going to continue it, right? There was going to be another one.
I wish they would have turned it into a ongoing series.
There's so much in that you can take away that they can build on that they didn't, unfortunately.
It was like turning on the Sunbow cartoons and starting over as a kid again.
And to me, it's still the best GI Joe movie ever made.
And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm going to put another GI Joe retrospective that you can click on right over here, or to pick an entirely different toy history topic, you can click on this playlist right over here. Otherwise, yo Joe, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for watching, and take care.